My name is Irfan Ahmed, and currently I'm professor of sociology at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey. Before joining Ibn Khaldun University, I was senior research fellow at Max Planck Institute for Ethnic and Religious Diversity in Göttingen. My interest is contemporary modern politics, and I'm equally interested in philosophy of ideas, or to put it another way, anthropology of ideas. So I have done work about different social movements. One of my works deals with the notion and practice of critique, which was published in 2017, and it is called Religion as Critique. My another set of interest is in political anthropology. So I'm equally interested in the question of social movement, in the question of democracy, and how democracy, ethnic violence, and the question of media. So I have a broad interest. I'm also interested in poetry and literature. So these are some of the main areas in which I have worked. This question has three dimensions. Number one, there are serious limits to the distinction that is often made between Zionism and Judaism. There are many aspects of this limitation. Most important of all is the insistence by nearly all Zionists to have a Jewish home or a state only in Palestine. Recall that many proposals for a Jewish homeland were offered, and this offer was made in nearly every part of the earth, from Australia, Manchuria, British Guiana to Uganda. It is often said with some kind of pleasure that Zionists like Theodor Herzl, they were secularists, and that Zionism itself is a secular ideology or movement. If that is the case, then the question is, why not have the so-called Jewish homeland in Australia or Uganda? As you will notice, the distinction between Judaism and Zionism, and therefore between a political ideology and mere faith, becomes really hard to sustain in this respect. Now, the second aspect is that we must be cautious in making a seamless link between Christian restorationism, which was born out of Protestant Reformation, and Zionism, which is typically a late 19th century development. Restorationism foregrounded the authority of the Hebrew scripture and Christian significance of Palestine. The second coming of the Christ and return of Jews to Palestine had been part of Christian theology before as well, but it is only with the advent of bloody nationalism, of which Zionism was the most grotesque product, that a demand for a Jewish homeland became a reality or option. Now, the third point is, of course, Theodor Herzl is considered as founder of Jewish Zionism. This is true, but only partially. As it is well known, Herzl published The Jewish State, or in German, Der Judenstaat, in 1896. Now, 3 years before him, William Heckler, an Anglican Christian restorationist, had published a book, the title of which was Restoration of the Jews to Palestine According to Prophecy. And this book came in 1893. There was actually a meeting between Theodor Herzl and Heckler. And this meeting is also a meeting between Christian restorationism and Zionism. Now, the key question here is, who is Heckler? William Heckler was actually born in 1845 in the Hindu holy city of Banaras or Varanasi, India. His father was a German Anglican missionary and his mother was English. Very early on, Heckler became familiar with evangelical restorationism, at the core of which was the belief in the second coming of Jesus. Jesus' advent was premised on the belief that it would take place only after Jews returned to Palestine. Now, before rushing to describe Theodor Herzl as founder of Zionism, let us also note that in 1891, more than 400 prominent Americans, and among them were politicians, judges, intellectuals, literary scholars, and the like, they had signed a petition asking the American government to initiate a process of persuading the great powers to put pressure on the Ottoman Empire to give Palestine to the Jewish people. This petition is known as the Blackstone Memorial because its author was William Blackstone, who died in 1935. And he was, as it is well known, an end-time pamphleteer. Now, much of what I have said is indebted to the work of Paul Mauchly, a Canadian scholar of religion. Ali Atai, an Iranian-origin American scholar of the Bible and who teaches at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, however, shows many inconsistencies in this theological invocation used by Christian restorationists as well as Zionists. Now, let us also consider the use of the term restorationism. Is it proper or not? And this is, I think, a critical question. Should it be restoration or occupation, right? And a good example which can be comparable to this one is recall that during the pandemic, when Muslims were in the mosque of Tabligh Jamaat, the media branded them as, you remember in Hindi the word used was कि तबलीगी जमात और मुसलमान मस्जिद में छुपे हुए हैं, hiding. Whereas the same media described Hindus in a temple as stuck or stranded. So it is the same act. For the Muslims, the term used is hiding. For Hindus, the term used is stuck or stranded. So likewise, my key point is that the term restoration is not an innocent term. Should it be also occupation or reoccupation? But of course, in the literature, the term used is Christian restoration. There are many Christian figures throughout history, and we are talking about modern history, especially from 19th century onwards, who have been die-hard supporter of Zionism. I will just mention three names, and these are very powerful figures. The first one is Arthur Balfour, who died in 1930. He served as British Prime Minister from 1902 to 1905. Later on, he became the Foreign Secretary during World War I, and in 1917, it is Balfour who issued the declaration which is known as Balfour Declaration. And he was quite a Christian. Actually, one historian described him as a Christian philosopher of the first rank. He attended a Presbyterian church. Balfour came from a very aristocratic family, and that was quite influential in British politics. His uncle was also the Prime Minister. He attended prestigious institutions of education, including Cambridge University, where he studied moral sciences. Now think about his Balfour Declaration and his study of moral science at Cambridge. Now, Chaim Weizmann, who was originally a Russian Jew, played a key role in the Balfour Declaration. Now, Weizmann migrated from Russia to Germany and eventually to Britain. He was a professor of organic chemistry, and he settled in Manchester, which was also the constituency of Balfour. It was there that he befriended Balfour, and then the friendship developed with the passage of time. Remember that Weizmann became the first president of Israel. Critically, it is the same Weizmann who recruited Patrick Geddes. And Patrick Geddes is the one who founded the Department of Sociology in Bombay. Geddes was recruited while he was to found and lead the Department of Sociology in Bombay, but part-time he would also work in Palestine. And Weizmann recruited kiddies to plan New Jerusalem. Weizmann was also the president of British Zionist Commission. Woodrow Wilson, who served as US President from 1913 to 1921, he was also a supporter of Zionism. You remember we talked about Black Stone before. So in 1916, American Zionists persuaded Black Stone to renew his petition supporting Jewish homeland, which he did. The petition won support from several churches, including the Baptist Church, which President Wilson was affiliated to. Needless to say that Wilson fully backed the 1917 Balfour Declaration. The same goes for Harry Truman, who served as US President from 1945 to 1953. And it was during his tenure that Israel was declared as a state.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses.
Truman was brought up as a Baptist, and he was quite familiar with Christian restoration ideas. After the declaration of Israel as a state, Zionists went to thank him because he helped create the state of Israel. Truman reportedly said, "What do you mean, help create? I am Cyrus." So to just give you a historical context, after conquering the Babylon, the Persian king Cyrus encouraged the return of Jews to what was known as Kingdom of Judah. The Hebrew Bible mentioned Cyrus in a positive way. Here, an important question is also this: why did the UK and the US and other Western power help create Israel? In addition to and along with the religious reason, as the formal Western imperial rule was coming to an end, the Western power wanted to have a satellite state in the form of Israel through which they could rule over the Arabs and Muslims, or what is now called the Middle East. As it is well known, the French created Lebanon as their own vassal state. The whole idea of human rights and refugees in the Western context evolved, as it is well known, in the wake of World War II. And the Holocaust was the major backdrop. In principle, humans and their rights could include anyone or everyone, but in effect or practice, it rarely included non-whites. Curiously, the discourse of human rights went hand in hand with dehumanization of people West did not like. And the discourse of dehumanization rested on the horror of World War II. Recall when Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, Western media described him as Hitler. The discourse of human rights, of course, did not include the communists. In Indonesia, close to 1 million people were killed in the name of communist by the Indonesian army under the dictatorship of Sukarno. The US, the UK, and other Western powers backed the massacre. Very recently, Australia's SBS made a film about the massacre in Indonesia. It is called The Act of Killing. It was actually made in 2013. What is important that all the killers and leaders of Death Squad, they came on the camera and they described how they killed these people.
Sepertinya menghabisin dengan gembira begitu.
Bagaimana cara Bapak memeriksa komunis di kantor redaksi waktu?
Dia tetap mengikuti tentang informasi. Setelah mereka dengan mendiang dana tahu semua informasi apa tujuan ini itu bersalah, kami ambil, kita habiskan.
Karena sebagai orang koran, kita bangun perasaan masyarakat benci pada dia, itu saja. sebagai orang koran.
So there is enough evidence of the killers themselves coming and making the confession, but no action has been taken against these killers. The people massacred are not considered humans. Hence, the question of their right is out of question. Yeah, so the question of human rights, I think Habermas, too, it doesn't seem to me that he is really concerned about rights of human everywhere. His main concern is basically Europe and particularly Germany. So historically, if you see, the key objective of the writings of Habermas is primarily this, because his whole thing is situated in the context of World War II. So he wants to find a way out for Germany and get acceptability for it in the wake of World War II. Of course, also to make Germany stronger. And if you see his statement on Palestine, what does he say? He says, and this is more or less a quote, "The democratic ethos of the Federal Republic of Germany, which is oriented towards the obligation to respect human dignity, is linked to a political culture for which Jewish life and Israel's right to exist are central elements worthy of special protection in light of the mass crime of the Nazi era." End of quote. Now, it is very clear from this concern of Habermas that any talk of human rights has to be subordinated first to the interest of Germany as a state, the identity of which is bound up or predicated on the interest of Israel as a state. This is the parameter of Habermas's thinking, which in my view is nothing else but predominantly ethnic. In any case, Palestinians are not considered humans. The former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dan Gillerman, described Palestinians as inhuman animals.
Is showing for the Palestinian people and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals who have done the worst atrocities that this century has seen and the worst atrocities that Jews have suffered since the Holocaust.
If you see in the contemporary political debate, Piers Morgan is a prominent journalist who has organized so many talks about Hamas and the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict. And the guy, every time he begins with 7th of October, describing it as a terror attack.
A terror attack of the nature we saw.
Was what happened on October the 7th a terror attack?
If you're happy to publicly condemn 9/11,
Would you condemn Hamas for what they did?
so just for the record, do you condemn what Hamas did that day? Do you unreservedly condemn?
And do you unreservedly condemn? Will you now take the opportunity to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th?
This to me looks like that it is not a really informed way of conducting discussion. If one can use the term, it is not a conversation initiator, but it is a conversation stopper. Hamas, to the Western eyes, and including, the Western governments as well as the Western media or the so-called civil society organization, they keep describing it as a terrorist formation. But let's note that this is a completely misleading account of Hamas. Hamas was formed in 1988, and there is no time here to go into the internal factors. There are factions within Palestinian movements. So let's leave that aside. It is also one of the strongest social movements in that part of the world. It has its own institution, it runs hospitals, it runs schools, it has its own network of support, which is spread from top to the bottom. So in 2006, when Hamas won the election, which and this is not an Arab thinker or politician who is saying this, but Jimmy Carter. He described the 2006 election as completely honest and fair. And precisely because Hamas doesn't toe the line of the Western state, it is constantly being vilified. And since it asserts the sovereign right of the Palestinians, therefore, the term terrorism is applied to Hamas to basically discredit it. The fact of the matter is that it is not simply a social movement organization, it has won the election. The way to understand this virulent opposition to Hamas, one way to understand this virulent opposition is to look at the statement that Senator Hillary Clinton made in private.
Troubled me deeply. I do not think we should have pushed for an election in the Palestinian territories. I think that was a big mistake. And if we were going to push for an election, then we should have made sure that we did something to determine who was going to win.
And she resented the Hamas victory, saying that why the US did not rig the election. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is clearly an important figure, and the quote you gave here is from 1938, and it is derived from his article titled The Jews. But it is not complete. In the same article, he also said they, meaning Zionists, can settle in Palestine only by the goodwill of the Arabs. If you read it, and it is not a complex thing, he is not opposed to the creation of Israel. His proposition is that it should be created. The question is about the methods, how of the Israeli state rather than if of the Israeli state. Historically speaking, one of Gandhi's earliest statements on Palestine is of March 1921, and this is, by the way, in the wake of Khilafat movement which was launched in India. So to Daily Herald, which is a newspaper published from London, he said, and this is a quote, "No canon of ethics or war can possibly justify the gift by the allies of Palestine to Jews. It would be a breach of implied faith with Indian Muslims in particular and the whole of India in general." However, later in the same year, Gandhi made another statement. And here is the statement. "All I contend is that they, meaning Jews, cannot possess Palestine through a trick or moral breach." As the quote shows, that they can possess, meaning the Zionists can have Palestine, but not through trick or moral breach. So you see, Gandhi, within a short span of time, the same year, he made two contradictory statements. But to account fully for Gandhi's position, let's consider 1937, because that is the year in which the British proposed the partition plan and the Jewish Agency, which was created by the mandate to assist the British in the integration of Jewish immigrants and mobilize international support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland. This agency approached Gandhi for a secret offer to mediate. And for this purpose, the Jewish Agency deputed Kallenbach, who was quite an intimate friend of Gandhi in South Africa. Kallenbach was an architect, and he considered himself Gandhian and Zionist at the same time. So Kallenbach visited India more than once and met Gandhi. In 1946, so 2 years before the declaration of Israel as a state, in 1946, President of the World Jewish Congress, Honeck, and Sidney Silverman, an Anglo-Jewish member of parliament, they held a secret meeting with Gandhi, who directed his secretary Parallel not to publish its report. And to Silverman, Gandhi made a statement. This was transmitted to his American biographer Louis Fisher. The statement confirmed by Gandhi read as follows, quote, "I told Sidney Silverman that the Jews have a good case in Palestine. If the Arabs have a claim in Palestine, the Jews have a prior claim." End of quote. I have said is mostly drawn from the book by Simon Panterbrick, a French scholar. Linguistic trick deployed by a clever lawyer that Gandhi was. What is important, after Gandhi was killed in 1948, Pyarelal, his secretary, destroyed all papers on Palestine. And he said, "There are materials I have decided to suppress." When asked which ones, Pyarelal answered, "Gandhi's views on Israel for a start. I'm able to suppress them from history since by God's grace, I'm the only one who knows about them." Probably, let me say something about this aspect of Gandhi. Last year, Rajmohan Gandhi, who is the grandson of Mohandas Gandhi, he listened to one of my podcasts where I had critiqued Gandhi on many issues, including his position about Israel, as well as how Gandhi never really upheld the principle of so-called non-violence. So Rajmohan Gandhi, after listening to that podcast, he sent me an email. And what is interesting, that Rajmohan Gandhi was not concerned about the evidence or the argument that I had given to support my case, that how Gandhi's commitment to violence was not 100% truth, but it was a strategic. And I had even gone further to say that actually Gandhi preached violence, especially when it comes to killing of Muslims. And this is there. I had given all the evidence. Rajmohan Gandhi was concerned not so much about the evidence and the argument, but in the email that he sent to me, his main concern was the reputation of Gandhi in the international public domain. So I wrote to Rajmohan Gandhi with further evidence and said that, okay, once we have looked at it, we can have a reasonable and fair debate. But afterwards, I never heard from Rajmohan Gandhi. So this is really, I would say, the most important question. So much is being written, so much is being said about the so-called Israel-Palestine problem or conflict. Now, what is the real problem? You know, if we are really concerned about this problem, then we have to really diagnose how actually the problem began. And that is rarely debated in the public domain. I would think that the key problem of the Israeli-Palestinian question is the problem of nationalism. And the fact that nationalism is the root of the problem, it is never brought to the public domain. And if the root of the disease is kept in dark, how can we actually have a solution? Because all kinds of incorrect cure is presented to the public. For example, rather than saying that, look, this is the problem of nationalism, we are told that the problem is Islamic fundamentalism or Islamic terrorism and what have you. What is even more important, that the problem of nationalism in this case is not just any kind of nationalism. It is a nationalism predicated on settler colonialism. Now, nationalism is the basis of the current and the past world order, or if you like, world disorder. And therefore, we do not see a real debate on nationalism itself. So let me explain this. We all know that there has been hatred against Jews in Europe for a long time. It existed before the rise of nationalism. It existed before the so-called Enlightenment or rise of modernity. But that hatred or hostility to Jews becomes something entirely different in 19th century, because then it is connected to the movement for nationalism. So this violence which erupted, or which was probably eruption is not the correct word, the violence against Jews were organized in Europe, in many parts of Europe, including in Germany. This was fueled by a strong sense of racist idea of what is German nation. Because once you imagine Germany as a pure Aryan nation, which itself is a racist idea, and Jews were considered as outside of German nation because your blood is impure and so on and so forth. So once you transform Jews into an anathema as the other of nation, then the Europeans found out, and the solution they offered, that in the course of building this so-called pure nation state, rather than dealing with the Jewish question, they wanted to transfer their own problem to the Middle East, or at that time, what was the territory under the Ottoman Empire. So the root is the problem of nationalism. And let's also note that there is hardly any nationalism which is not expansionist. And therefore, the problem that we face in the case of Israel and Palestine, that Israel is not happy with the existing border, which in any case it has usurped, legally and illegally, but it also has a grand plan to take or to usurp more land. So I think a true solution to the so-called Israeli-Arab or Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we will not have a true solution unless we also really confront the question of nationalism. The root of Israeli-Arab and Israeli-Palestinian conflict lies in European nationalism, which the European power, rather than tackling on their own in their own territory, they transfer it elsewhere, outside of Europe. So let's make it very clear that unless we confront this question of nationalism, and by the way, in my view, I think nationalism is one of the most ethnic and gory ideologies that we have created in the contemporary world. So to think about a solution to the Palestinian problem is to also think beyond the nation state. We have to reorient our thinking in such a way that it is not a hostage to the dictates or the templates of nationalism. And we cannot have a solution to this as long as we continue to pay homage to nationalism as a sacred ideology. It is not a sacred ideology. It is something that humans have made. And likewise, we have the potentiality, and we should use our critical power to think beyond the nation state and nationalism, not sacralize it. And that is where I think our future thinking should be directed.